Hello, it's Destiny here again. Thank you for tuning in. Now the youth will be presenting the voices of Easter and the resurrection story. And I'll be doing Judas, the voice of betrayal. It all came to me at the Passover meal. We gathered in an upper room with Jesus to celebrate the feast. Then Jesus interrupted the conversation by announcing that one of us would betray him. One by one, each disciple asked if he were the one. As I dipped my hand in the dish, Jesus said something to the two next to him, Peter and John. They looked at me, weariness on their faces. I know that he had told them. I stood and rushed out of the room to the garden in Gethsemane. I went straight to the chief priests and told them to hurry. They agreed. Some went to get the temple police. The rest of us went to the Roman garrison, where the priests required a contingent of soldiers to accompany us. I led the way. When we got to the garden, Jesus was praying. The rest of the disciples had fallen asleep. Jesus heard us coming and roused the disciples. I stepped forward from the shadows. I kissed him on the cheek and greeted him, saying, Rabbi. Now, finally, in this act, I am free, not being used by anyone. A rope around my neck, standing at the edge of this cliff. I am the voice of betrayal.
I'm Danielle, and I will be portraying Peter, the voice of denial. I've been with Jesus. They have him now inside Fis's dungeon, I suppose. Now the Romans are in with them. The master warned me. He said Satan would sift me like a farmer sifting wheat. But he said he prayed for me, that my faith would not completely fail. He told us he was going to die. I said no, I would die for him. What brave words. Now I am the voice of denial. They brought him into the city. We made our way through the dark streets, staying a safe distance behind the soldiers. All the way across town. We soon guessed they were bringing him here to the place of the high priest. But for what? The council couldn't meet at night. The priests and scribes and temple guard went through the gate into the courtyard. The night dragged on. What was happening in the hall? I strained to hear. Evidently, the council had convened after all. What were they doing? I moved closer to the hall, shifting for a position where I could see. I had no idea where John was. I finally found a place where I could see Jesus himself, standing before the council, his head bowed, completely still, surrounded by noise and confusion. I asked the man next to me what was happening. He turned and said, So you're a Galilean too, aren't you? Several faces turned our way. I recognized 2 or 3 of the men who had been standing at the fire. Man, I don't know what you're talking about. Angry and excited, I began to call curses down on myself. I swore that I never knew Jesus. Now I wonder, do I really love him? Can real love produce this kind of failure? But I do love him, don't I? If I loved him, I would keep his word. I would not fail. Hereafter I will be known as only the voice of the denial.
We're doing Mary Magdalene, the voice of adoration. I am one of the 12 voices of Easter. Mine is the voice of adoration. Jesus changed my life. He loved me when no one else did. I have almost forgotten the days before him. I will not speak of them. I will only speak of him. I followed him wherever he went. I was always in the crowd when he talked. I saw him raise the dead and heal the sick. The blind saw, the lame walked, the deaf heard, the dumb spoke. Those bound by evil spirits were released by his command. I was one of the several women who followed him. We were not as close to him as the 12, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and the others, but we constantly felt the warmth of his smile and the gentleness of his voice. He loved us as much as we loved him. But then the leaders in Jerusalem arrested him and killed him. I stood at his cross and watched him die. I wept to see him suffer. We spent a long, cheerless day together. As soon as the sun set, the bazaars opened. Mary, the mother of James, Mary, the wife of Cleophas, Joanna, Susanna, and others of us hurried into Jerusalem with spices we needed to anoint Jesus' body. We decided to go the next morning, early in the day, when we could go without notice. But when we arrived at the tomb, we were shocked. The stone was not there, nor were any soldiers to be seen. The stone had been rolled away, taken right out of its trough, and tipped over. As we stood and wondered what had happened to the stone, 2 men, dressed in dazzling white robes, suddenly appeared. These garments were not the togas of the Roman soldiers, nor were they the long white robes of the Pharisees. These were not men at all, but angels of God. One of the angels bid us to look inside the tomb and see for ourselves. I ran as fast as I could to tell Peter and John. When we returned, the other women were gone. We looked into the tomb, empty. I was convinced that someone had stolen the body of Jesus. Peter and John ran from the garden, but I remained. I had nowhere to go. My heart was overcome with sorrow. I just stood there, weeping. Then I heard a voice ask me, "Woman, why are you weeping?" I assumed it was the gardener. "Sir, what have you done with him?" I asked, wiping my face. It was fully light, but tears blurred my eyes. I turned, but could not see clearly. Then he called me by my name, Miriam. That was my Aramaic name. Then the name my parents and my friends called me. A gardener would not have spoken Aramaic to me. A Roman would not know my name. I knew that voice. I looked up. I saw him. It was Jesus. I answered in Aramaic, "Rabboni." I threw myself at his feet, weeping, laughing, and not believing. My master, my teacher, my savior, my Lord, he was standing there, alive. Of course I became one of the 12 voices of Easter, a voice of astonishment and wonder, the first human voice of
Sometimes
adoration.
there's nothing you can do. At least that's the way that I felt that night, my last night on the council. We had been summoned with great urgency to Caiaphas' house. Inside were the judges and lawmakers of Israel. Out in the courtyard were the temple police and a mob. Before us stood a man I had come to know and admire, Jesus of Nazareth. He was, well, the more I listened, the more I marveled, the more I loved him. He said he had come to save those who were lost. I was a respected member of the Sanhedrin. Others on the council scoffed at his claims. Let him seek the lost and save them if he can. Just leave us alone. This man was God's appointed Savior for Israel. But I am not a brave man. I followed Jesus secretly because I was afraid of the others on the Sanhedrin. So even though I believed that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah, the Savior of Israel, I never told anyone about it. Angry voices derided him, and false accusers lied about him. Still my voice was silent. Our leaders condemned him and sent him to Pilate, the governor, for a sentence of death. Pilate passed sentence and sent him to the place of the skull, where they crucified him. I had never paid much attention to crucifixions before, but this one I watched. Jesus hung on the cross in agony. I didn't want anyone to see me. I watched him suffer. I saw him die. Before he died, he raised his voice in forgiveness. Forgiveness. Something changed inside me. I decided that it was past time for me to raise my voice. Perhaps my silent voice might become something better, a voice of courage. The Roman soldiers determined that Jesus was dead. I left Golgotha and went straight to the Tower of Antonio. I requested an audience with Pilate. I plucked up my courage and asked Pilate to release the dead body of Jesus into my custody. He had nothing to gain by granting me a favor, but he signed a release. I didn't linger to chat with him about it. I sent word to my friend Nicodemus to meet me at the family tomb. I hurried back to the scene of the crucifixion with Pilate's release. I presented it to the centurion and asked him to take Jesus' body down from the cross. Some of Jesus' followers were standing nearby, so I asked a couple of them to help me carry the body. We took it to my family tomb, which was nearby. Nicodemus was there. He had brought linen, bandages, spices, and aromatics, a mixture of myrrh and aloes. It was late in the day, and we had to hurry to finish before the Sabbath. Nicodemus and the others helped me to roll a great stone in front of the entrance. It was a heavy stone and would not be easily moved. Later, Pilate even sealed the tomb and commanded Roman soldiers to guard it. When I think back on these things, it surprises me that I had the courage to do what I did. I knew that my actions meant the end of my term on the Sanhedrin, the end of my good name in the community, the end of everything I had thought so important in my long life. But what they thought no longer mattered to me. I was still to find my voice, and it was a voice of courage. Who am I? I am Joseph of Arimathea.